Good morning. I want to invite you to open up in your New Testament to John chapter 10, if you'll go there, please. John chapter 10 is the context that we're going to work in this morning. I've been very prayerful, I really have been very prayerful about our pursuit of leadership, God's leadership for us as a people, and about us doing the right kinds of things to prepare our men and to prepare us as a congregation so that we can be ready for that leadership and that it will be the right kind of leadership that God brings to us, that we're ready for it, to have the kind of leaders and to submit to the kind of leaders that God wants to raise up among us, as we know from the model that He gives us and the teaching that He gives us in the New Testament. Last week, we described some perils that elders face as individuals, some things that can threaten the kind of leadership that God wants for us. All of those perils had in common the danger of elders acting independently instead of acting, leading, deciding as a team and leveraging the wisdom that God purposed in having many counselors. Today, I want to describe some perils that an eldership can face as a group, hazards that can limit their influence and that can limit the health of the congregation. And I brought us to John chapter 10 because Jesus gives us a picture here of how He functions as the Good Shepherd. And the things that He tells us about His own character and about His own behavior as the Good Shepherd give us a model for how elders as shepherds ought to behave in the leadership that they provide in a congregation. Notice, if you would, read with me the first 3 verses of John chapter 10. Jesus says, "Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter by the door into the fold of the sheep, but climbs up some other way, he is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is a shepherd of the sheep. To him, the one that comes through the door, to him the doorkeeper opens, and the sheep hear his voice. And he calls his own sheep by name, and he leads them out." I want you to appreciate the picture of the shepherd who comes in the door to the sheep. The good shepherd is not a threat to the sheep. Do you see that? He's not a threat. That's the reason he could come in the door. He is a welcome presence. He makes an easy entrance into the sheepfold using the door. He doesn't have to resort to stealth. He doesn't have to resort to force to make an entrance into the lives of the sheep. He doesn't have to climb over the wall. He comes in the door. And when He comes in the door, He causes no alarm. There's no panic. There's no stampede on the part of the sheep. The sheep don't run from the Good Shepherd. The sheep don't avoid the Good Shepherd. In fact, quite the opposite. How do the sheep respond to the shepherd? They run to Him, right? They don't run away from Him. They feel safe when He's around. They know that they're going to eat. They know that they're going to drink. They know that they're going to go out with Him to green pastures and to quiet waters and be protected all the while. That leads me to this warning, to this exhortation. An eldership needs to avoid the peril of what I'm going to call austerity, of being overly grave or of being severe or harsh in their leadership. If people are afraid, if people are intimidated by the eldership, they won't bring them their problems. They won't ask them their questions. They won't voice to them their concerns. They'll run away or they'll hide from the shepherds. What happens is you end up with a congregation of Sunday Christians who hide their sin and their problems and who don't ask their questions if they have them because it's not safe to share those things. It's not safe to ask for help. It's not safe to challenge the status quo. The result is not a healthy church, but an anemic one where only the strong can survive. The weak and the vulnerable are purged from the flock or they're chased away. Could I give you a few warning signs of an austere eldership? When new sheep come, they don't feel welcomed. They don't feel embraced. They don't feel protected by an austere eldership. Instead, they feel intimidated, or they feel interrogated, or they feel inspected. They don't get to know the shepherds, and the shepherds don't get to know them. They just feel like they've been inspected and they've been immunized to make sure they don't have any existing problems and that they'll not make any new messes. That's a feeling that's communicated when an eldership is overly austere. Discipline feels punitive. It will feel purgative. It will feel humiliating. It will not be corrective or restorative. Discipline that is timely, and it is the Lord commands it. But discipline that is timely, that is wise, that is compassionate, that is communicative, will draw the flock closer together. That's the way it works biblically. It will endear the shepherds to the flock. When discipline scatters sheep rather than drawing sheep, then that can be the sign of an austere leadership. Instruction feels more like indoctrination with an austere leadership. People will be afraid to ask sincere questions or to raise honest challenges to teaching or practices. They will keep their questions, their doubts, their curiosities to themselves, or they'll discuss them quietly out of earshot of the shepherds. And that's not what shepherds want. If they're going to provide guidance, if they're going to provide counsel, they want the sheep to talk to them. But in an austere situation, then the sheep hide those kinds of things. Austere leadership creates followers. Listen carefully. Austere leadership creates followers that parrot orthodox teaching rather than being persuaded of sound doctrine because they've not tested or tried the teaching for themselves in the crucible of honest investigation. Such churches are actually become rife for false teachers because the sheep really don't know the Scriptures. They just know the traditions that they're supposed to believe. Austere elderships practice a cowboy leadership style rather than a shepherding leadership style. Let me explain the difference. Cowboys drive the herd. That's the way a cowboy works. They drive the herd. But shepherds lead the flock. What happens if you try to drive sheep? If you drive sheep, you scatter them. You have to lead them. You have to lead them with servant leadership. Austere elderships look strong on the outside, but they're not strong. And the flock looks healthy on the outside, but they're not healthy. People just get good at hiding their sin, hiding their problems, hiding their differences, dealing with things on their own, and the elders just deal with those who disrupt the peace or whose problems become public and necessitate punitive action. We need to learn from Ephesus. In the book of Revelation, Ephesus was the strong church that did not tolerate evil men, that put to test those who call themselves apostles, but were found to be false. Revelation 2, verse 2. That was good. But at the same time, while they were being strong about those things, Jesus said, I have this against you, that you've left your first love. Revelation 2, verse 4. He urged them to repent, or he said that he would come and remove their lampstand. It is possible to be strong and yet at the same time to be approachable. It's possible to be sound, but at the same time to be transparent and to be welcoming to people, and not have a situation where an eldership or where shepherds are austere. Jesus says in verse 3 again of John chapter 10, concerning the good shepherd, that to him the doorkeeper opens, and the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. And when he puts forth all his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice, he says in verse 4. I want you to see how familiar the good shepherd is with the sheep, and how familiar the sheep are with the good shepherd. The good shepherd knows the names. He knows the needs. He knows the news of the sheep. He is familiar with them. They know his voice, and he knows them and calls them by name. To someone else, all the sheep, if they're out in the field, to someone else, they all look the same. Two flocks that are mingling in the same pasture will be indistinguishable to someone who's not their shepherd. But the good shepherd can pick out his own sheep in the pasture. He knows them that well that he can distinguish the sheep in the midst of the flock. And when he calls or when he whistles for them in his own distinctive way, his sheep, just imagine the sheep in the pasture and they're all grazing, and the shepherd whistles or he calls for them, his sheep will perk up. They'll look up from their grazing or whatever it is that they're doing, and they run to him, they follow him because they know his voice. They are ready and they are eager to follow him. Another shepherd might whistle, or another shepherd might beckon them, but they'll keep grazing because they pay no attention. They will not listen, Jesus says, to the voice of a stranger. They know their shepherd, and their shepherd knows them. One of the perils that an eldership can fall into is the peril of detachment. The peril of detachment. Detachment occurs when an eldership or when shepherds don't know the sheep and the sheep don't know them. And I want to say that it is a common problem in our culture, and we need to see how our culture can affect leadership. It's a common problem in our culture because people are wealthy, Christians are wealthy, busy, and disconnected. And so leadership has to take action to counter what happens in our culture. And eldership in our culture can feel like the board of directors in a corporation. They can feel that way, and the sheep can feel that way toward them. They cast vision, they render decisions, they approve budgets, they hire and they fire, but they're not connected to the people. If an eldership isn't practiced in hospitality, they will get detached from the flock. We just need to know that. If an eldership is not practiced in hospitality, they will get detached from the flock. When shepherds don't make a concerted effort to get to know the sheep by visiting in their homes and by having the sheep in their homes, they will not know the sheep and the sheep will not know them. When the shepherds don't create safe, warm, and intimate occasions for getting and staying connected with the sheep, then the sheep will wander, the sheep will get sick, the sheep will die, and the shepherds will be oblivious to who is missing and to what has happened. They will be the last to know. They'll be the last to know. Shepherds have to shepherds have to be purposeful to make the most of our assemblies, of our together time. They need to mingle with the sheep when the sheep come together. But our assemblies will not be sufficient to build meaningful relationship where shepherds know the names, where they know the needs, where they know the news of the sheep. There has to be meaningful communication, conversation, fellowship, and shared experiences outside of the assembly. And the smaller that those occasions are, the more meaningful they will be. When you have 20 people in your house, it's a lot different than when you have a family or two in your home, isn't it? And if I invite 50 people over to my house, are you going to feel the same way if I just invite your family over? I mean, it's not going to be the same, is it? That's a lot of work, though. Building meaningful relationships, having meaningful communication, knowing the names, the needs, and the news of the sheep, that's a lot of work. But if we want a congregation where elders intercede, where people confess their sin, where the sheep come to the shepherds for wisdom, for counsel, for correction, for accountability, if we want an eldership that is approachable, where the sheep feel safe and secure, where they feel led and fed, where they don't keep secrets, where they don't wander into the wood alone, where they don't follow after wolves who prey on sheep, if we really want that, then we need leaders that are well connected and are well respected. And that takes work. It takes the work of getting connected. That is not, that getting connected and being respected is not the work of the sheep. That's so important for us to understand. It is the work of the shepherds. It's the work of the shepherds. When elders are disconnected, that is not the sheep's fault. That is the shepherd's fault. And men who aspire to be shepherds need to embrace that responsibility. They have to work. You have to work. If you want to be a shepherd, you have to work at initiating and maintaining meaningful connections to the people. People flocked to Jesus. They flocked to Jesus because they knew He cared. And the reason they knew He cared is because Jesus went out of His way to get connected to them. And so they went out of their way. They dug through the roof. They came as a leper. They walked without packing a lunch. I mean, they went out of their way to get connected to Him because He went out of His way to get connected to them. Isn't that the kind of leadership we want? Jesus says in verse 9 of John chapter 10, I am the door. I am the door. If anyone enters through me, he will be saved, and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. John 10 and verse 9. I just want you to get the picture of how the shepherd, Jesus says, is the door. The shepherd is the door. Now think about what that metaphor means. The good shepherd is the door. A healthy flock can't stay in the sheepfold, right? It can't stay where it sleeps during the night. It can't stay there all the time. If the sheep stay in the sheepfold, they'll run out of pasture. They'll eat up all the grass and there won't be anything left. They'll run out of water in the sheepfold. They'll get diseased from being cooped up. They'll get restless and listless. They'll get weak from not being exercised. Jesus says the good shepherd is the door. And that is full of meaning. First, it means that He stands between the flock and any danger, right? That's the idea of the door. Is that you got to go through me to get to the sheep, right? So the shepherd is the door. Any thief or predator will have to come through Him to get to the sheep. But as the door, He's not just the protector. He is also the steward of their entry and exit. So He's in control of when they go out to eat and when they go out to drink and when they go out to find green pastures and when they go out to get exercise. And so since He's the steward of their entry and exit, He's a steward of their health and well-being. He's responsible for taking them in and out of the sheepfold so they can be fed and watered and exercised. And He stands in the door as they go in and as they go out to make sure that they're healthy, that no one is injured, that no one is limping as they come in and as they go out, that they didn't get any burrs while they were out in the field, that they didn't get any barbed wire or get snake bit. And he looks to see if anyone's missing as they come in and out. As the door, the shepherd dresses their injuries and ministers to their ailments. Being the door of the sheep is job one of the shepherds. Being the door of the sheep is job one of the shepherds. Protecting the sheep and being the steward or the minister of their health and well-being. That means this. An eldership has to guard itself from being drawn away from the door to matters that are not their mission. You got to mind the door. You got to stay in the gap there. You got to stay on task with what is the big job of an eldership and not get distracted to minutia. Elders can abandon the most important work of ministering to the spiritual well-being of the flock and end up serving tables. In Acts chapter 6, when the Grecian widows were being neglected in the daily distribution of food, to indigent widows, the apostles summoned the congregation. They needed to deal with the needs of the widows in a compassionate and an expedient way, but they couldn't be personally burdened with tending to the widows to the neglect of their primary mission. They said, the apostles did, in Acts 6 and verse 2, it's not desirable for us to neglect the Word of God in order to serve tables. Therefore, brethren, select from among you 7 men of good reputation, full of the Spirit and of wisdom, whom we may put in charge of the task. And get that, put them in charge of the task. But we will devote ourselves to prayer and to the ministry of the Word. Verse 4 of Acts chapter 6. Wise elders have to be like these wise apostles. They must delegate tasks and ministries that are not their mission to men who are reputable, who are capable, and godly. The first work of deacons is to relieve the elders of those burdens that will distract them from ministering to the spiritual health and the well-being of the people. And when you delegate, you notice how it says you put them in charge. You don't look over their shoulder. I mean, you put capable men in charge so that they can be in charge of the task. You let them have the task. And in Acts 6, we also find that we see even special occasions where men who are not filling the office of deacons, these are not deacons in Acts chapter 6, they were men who did just one specific thing, not a general work, but took care of one specific need. We see special occasions where men who are not filling the office of deacons are nevertheless given a specific job that they're qualified to manage so that the leadership can stay devoted to prayer and to the ministry of the Word. It's a very important model that we read of there. One of the greatest perils to elderships is serving tables. Serving tables is easier than people matters. It's easier than teaching. It's easier than admonishing, than reproving, than rebuking, than exhorting, than rescuing, than interceding, than counseling, than convicting, than persuading. All of those people jobs are hard jobs. And all of those host of people things, there's a whole host of people things that need to be done in ministering to sheep. So it's tempting to be busy serving tables. And there are often tangible and often quick results that come from serving tables. The results of ministering to people are not always so visible. They're not always so tangible. And they're not always immediately rewarding. And in a growing congregation, there are lots of potential tables to serve, so that an eldership can easily feel busy and feel productive tending to the tables. But all the while, they can hurt the body by doing the work that someone else could do. And they deprive other leadership within the congregation of opportunities to grow in service. They model poor habits for future leadership, and instead of being a door for the sheep, leading them in and out to find pasture, as Jesus says, to find life, and to find life abundantly, instead of being a door, they become a lid. Lids limit growth. Doors promote growth because they at once protect and at the same time provide access to vital resources. We want an eldership that is a doorway. We want elders who are doors, not elders who are lids for us as a people. The Good Shepherd needs to be the door, making sure that there are no obstructions to the health and to the growth of the sheep, but that they are enabled and empowered to thrive. So what do we do about all those things? How do we avoid those perils? Let me say 3 things here as we conclude. Number 1, remember, cowboys drive. Shepherds lead. If you drive the sheep, you will scatter the sheep. To be an effective shepherd, you need to be a welcome presence and a welcome voice within the flock. If you aspire to be a shepherd, you need to learn to lead and not drive. Shepherds come in the door and they go out the door. They don't cause a disturbance. Their leadership is welcomed. It's coveted. You can say indicting things to people. You can discipline. You can do those things that are needed. You can confront. You can do all of those things when people know that you love them, when they're connected to you. You can't do any of those things when you're not connected and when you're not respected. The shepherd doesn't have to force an entry into people's lives. Secondly, not only remember that cowboys drive and that shepherds leave, secondly, get connected. Get connected and you'll be respected. We've got to fight the way in which our culture detaches us. It means that we're not connected to each other. If you aspire to be a shepherd, you need to work at knowing the names, the needs, and the news of the sheep. Get connected to them. And hospitality is a key ingredient. It's a necessary ingredient in doing that. Number 3, if you aspire to be a shepherd, you need to stay mission-minded. This takes prayer. It takes vigilance, the same way it did on the part of the apostles, because it is so easy to start minding tables. It is so easy to do the things that you know how to do and not do the things that you need to do. Get that? You can't just do something because you know how to do it, because you know how to change a light bulb, because you know how to mow the grass, because you know how to do accounting or do. You can't just do the things you know how to do. You got to do the things you need to do to take care of the spiritual needs of the people. So stay mission-minded. Be a door, not a lid. Don't take on work or initiatives that distract you from prayer and from the ministry of the Word. If God has equipped you to do those things, if He's equipped you to minister to the Word to people and their spiritual needs, then don't take on initiatives that distract you from that. You've got to stay mission-minded. We've got to stay mission-minded. As I said last week, I share these perils not so that we'll be fearful, not so that we'll be intimidated, not so that we'll be reluctant about pursuing an eldership as a people, but so that we'll go forward with our eyes open, that we'll go forward prayerfully, that we'll go forward thoughtfully, that we'll go forward warily about the potential pitfalls and hazards that we can fall into. We will make some of the mistakes that we talked about last week and that we talked about today. And so we've got to own those when we see them, when we recognize the peril. We've got to give diligence to correcting that, so that we can have shepherds that are good shepherds who lay down their life for the sheep the way that Jesus modeled here. And that we have a healthy flock that glorifies God, where we grow and where we thrive. God help us. God help us. God bless us with that kind of eldership, with those kinds of shepherds, with that kind of flock. That's my hope and that's my prayer for us. The Good Shepherd laid down His life for you. What will you give Him? Will you bring Him your life? Will you bring Him your submission? Will you bring Him your obedience? Will you be washed in the blood of the Lamb? Won't you come as we stand and as we sing?